I went on to graduate school at Harvard Business School. The largest profit and loss that I've led was an $800 million business that had sometimes doors are shut because you're not supposed to do that particular thing at that moment.
Have you personally experienced any microaggressions? What do you believe is the biggest mistake organizations make when it comes to engagement? Again, what would your advice young leaders who are just starting off in a leadership role? Giselle is a 5-time global GM for the Fortune 250 companies, professor at DEI at the Washington University. She's a coach, a TEDx speaker, and I can go on and on. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the RK Leadership Podcast, where we empower tomorrow's leaders through the sharing of knowledge, experience, and inspiring stories. I'm your host, Rob Kamranpoor, and my very special guest tonight is Giselle Marcus. Now, before I turn it over to her, I like to take a minute to thank Giselle for being with me here today and sharing her stories and experience. So Giselle is a 5-time global GM in 40 countries and 5 continents, and she worked for the Fortune 250 companies. She's a professor at DEI at the Washington University. She's a coach, a TEDx speaker, and I can go on and on, but I rather, turn it over to her so she can start talking about herself. Again, thank you so much for being here, Giselle. And if you're ready, we can start it off.
I'm ready, Rob. It is a delight. Thank you so much for having me on your show because I really appreciate how you focus on leadership. So I've come to enjoy your podcast myself. So being a guest really means a lot to me. So thank you.
Thank you so much. So, Giselle, why don't we start off by you telling us a little bit about your story and how you got to where you are today?
Sure. So a little bit about my story. Boy. Okay, so I'll start. I was born and raised in New York City, in Harlem. And I should say the old Harlem, not the new, because Harlem has been regentrified from when I grew up. So when I grew up, it was a place of socioeconomic challenges, I would say.
Mm.
And I was raised by my mother and my grandmother. My parents divorced when I was single digits. And I went to public school, including a specialized high school for business, Murray Bertram High School. And I always had an eye toward business because both my parents worked in business. So my mother worked as, she started as an operator at the phone company, and my dad worked for the New York Times. Both of them, moved up the ranks in those roles. So what I knew was business. So when I went to undergrad, I actually went to Syracuse University and I majored in what? Business, with a focus on management information systems, because at that time I was really excited about what computers could do and the power of computing. It wasn't as powerful as it is today, but it was powerful then. And I also double majored in what was called transportation distribution management then, which is really now logistics. And I did that because at the time, Syracuse University was one of 11 schools that had that as a major. So I thought, strategically, probably a smart move to have that as a double major, because companies would be looking for people such as myself. And there was a limited pool of us that had been educated with that as a major in college. And from there, I worked at what is now Accenture as a consultant for 3 years. And from there, I went on to graduate school at Harvard Business School. I always wanted to get an MBA. So it was always in my future. And I should also say, I come from a household where I am first generation college. So both of my parents, both highest level of education is a high school diploma. So I'm always very proud to say that my mom got me to an Ivy League. So I'm indebted to her for that. And what I would say about that experience is, quite honestly, when I went to business school, I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to major in. But I got into 5 of what would be the top 10 schools. all 5 that I applied to, I actually got in. And I chose Harvard. The other ones I got into was Northwestern, Wharton, um, Columbia, University of Michigan. Um, and what I chose Harvard because of the general management curriculum. Because when you think about Northwestern, you think about marketing, you think about Wharton, you think about finance. And I wasn't quite sure I wanted to go down those paths. So I just thought that if I became a general manager, I could waltz myself into whatever it was I decided I wanted to do. And going to business school gave me 2 more years to do that. So graduating from business school, I ended up working in the telecommunications industry at what is now AT&T. And I started in new product development, launched 2 products, proud to have a couple of patents at the US Patent Office. And then from there, I got moved into the call center of our wholesale business. And that's when I realized operations was my thing. That was my superpower. Why? Because I appreciate being able to know where I stand regarding my performance. And what I had learned from being in new product development was, I would say I got lucky, right? By being able to actually launch 2 new products. When I came into that group, we hadn't launched a product in a while. But say if I didn't, does that mean my performance was poor? Or could that be the market? It could be a variety of things. But my concern was, what would my boss say for my annual review, right? So when I went into the call center, what I saw and what I enjoyed is that metrics, you see them every day. So your call to answer rate, the quality of the customer service that your customers are getting, how you need to staff it, given standard and normal situations. So what I enjoyed is that, and I was responsible for compliance at the time, but what I enjoyed about that is at every turn, every day, every month, I knew how I was performing. And from there, that's when I knew general management was the track that I was interested in and leading profit and loss. And to your point, the largest profit and loss that I've led was an $800 million business that was over across 40 countries, 5 continents. And in all the work that I have done, and you could tell by what I'm sharing, I've never really had a diversity, equity, and inclusion title until recently. When I was doing the general manager work, at one turn, I was the general manager for what we call metro market strategies. This was when I was at Johnson Controls. And it was a strategy to enhance the number of partnerships that we had with minority owned, women owned, veteran owned, et cetera, types of businesses. Why? Because we were part of the $1 billion roundtable, which meant we spent $1 billion a year with companies like this. However, we didn't have partnerships, and we were looking for what we call symbiotic relationships. So the one that I'm most excited about is there's a young lady that I met named Margaret Garner. She was the first African-American woman-owned construction company to build a Walmart store. So she built that in Chicago. And the reason this was a great symbiotic relationship for Johnson Controls was our salespeople couldn't seem to get our mechanical equipment into that big box store. So she was building the store, she could pull in our equipment. And then what did she need? What she needed, she didn't have the capacity to bond to build more than one store at a time. And as a large corporation, you often have excess bonding capacity. You could buy the insurance, etc. So that was the one job that I had that was really related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. But otherwise, the title is new for me over the past 3.5, 4 years. But the other work that I had done when I was at Johnson Controls, at AT&T, at Thermo Fisher Scientific, I was always involved in employee resource groups, either women or that identified with my ethnicity, African American. And I've had the opportunity to work alongside executive sponsors to be able to assist them in creating diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies, But more importantly than creating the strategy is really how do you actually implement the plan on the ground? How do you measure the plan? So that was work that I opted to do in addition to my standard job because it was something that I just had an interest in. So that's how I came to pretty much be in this role. And what's so interesting about being in higher education, I actually was looking into an operations role at Washington University and found out that after interviewing, I think it was the quickest interview in the world, Rob. I think it was 8 minutes long. And the recruiter said, you know, you're way overqualified for this job. He said, I would do you a disservice if I was going to put you in it. And then before going into that interview, I had contacted people that I knew there. And the long story short, I happened to know the person who was the department chair for organizational behavior. And she said, I'm sorry that job didn't work out, but have you ever thought about teaching? And I said, I had not. I said, never thought about it. She said, well, you have a TEDx. I have a TEDx on networking, and I do a lot of public speaking. She said, but public speaking is like teaching. And I said, I couldn't deny that, Rob. I said, I think you're right about that. So then I went down this path of being a professor of practice for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And what that meant was I teach it from a perspective of what's practical in the workplace as a professor of practice, but and also backing that up with research. And when you look at my 20 plus years in corporate America, it gives me quite a bit of material to be able to develop a course. So I teach a course called Leading Across Differences. It's a required course for our full-time MBA students. In addition, I think it's been a little over a year, I've recently was asked to take on the staff role to be the vice dean for the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at my school. So, Rob, I don't have just one title, but two in that space at a time, as you know, where this work is being challenged here in the United States. But I will say that I do believe that I am the right leader at this time to be in this role because of the experience that I have in the workplace and the experience that I have, I would say also, as a woman and as a woman of color.
Amazing. There's so much to unpack here. I've got so many follow-up questions for you. But let's start with the last piece, as you mentioned, and um, with the new president coming in for you guys, um, there was an initiative to remove DEI from certain places. I want to get your thoughts on that. You know, why did that happen to begin with, and what were organizations doing wrong with the whole DEI initiative? Because I've seen a lot within the organizations that I work with where organizations use it as a ticky box, as some people call it,
Mhm.
just to show from a perception perspective, hey, you know what? We're DEI because we've got a minority, a person of color, a person of this
Mhm.
gender, etc. How do you unpack that? What's your thought behind it, and what is going on right now in the US with it?
Sure. So I'll work it backwards. So when you talk about what's the problem with DEI, I mean, I think you somewhat hit the nail on the head when you said a tick box. So diversity, equity, and inclusion, when done right, um, is something that should be integrated into your organization in terms of your people resource management, right? And if you're hiring people just to tick a box, that's not very strategic. Um, and usually it's not sustainable.
Yep.
And what I mean by that, so okay, you've hired diverse people to work in your workplace, but if they don't feel welcomed and valued, no matter who you are, right? Um, that strategy is not going to have legs. It's not going to be able to stick. And companies that have this as part of their culture of actually embracing different people and making them feel welcome, um, it seems to work. So Costco would be an example of that here, the big box store here in the United States. It's always been part of what they do, but they really haven't been an organization who puts it on the center stage. It's just of a part of them having a good workforce, with them thinking, wow, if my employees enjoy working here, I have engaged employees. And if I have engaged employees that are happy to be here, they're going to go to bat for me. Every time I go into Costco, if I have a question, the employee actually will walk me to where I need to go to get what I need. I know the last time I went there, I was looking for the new keys for cars, can be very expensive. And time to time, they have a vendor that actually cuts keys at a reduced price. So I went there, they weren't there. Someone said, well, let me introduce you to this person who would be able to find the number. The person went to a desk, found the number, wrote it down, put it on a piece of paper, all the things. Where sometimes you'll go into a store and you'll get some kind of miscellaneous, oh, they're just not here today.
Yeah.
And that's the start and the ends of it. But the point I'm making is that the Costco employee goes to all ends to meet the need of the customer. And part of the reason they do that is because they love their job and they're treated as an integral part of the company. So when you talk about embedding diversity, equity, and inclusion into an organization, and it's a part of your strategy, that's when it works. It doesn't work well at all if you are just hiring someone because they're from a diverse group. So that's part 2 of your question. Now, part 1 of your question, why, are we experiencing this backlash, in the United States? So my opinion is, I'm going to base this on why we have this class at my school. And that is, in the United States, the population of those within our country is changing. In 1970, the majority of people in the workplace, when my parents were adults and working, were white and male. There really weren't even a lot of women. So now what you're seeing is by 2050, it's going to be majority minority, which is different, which means now you have different people in the workplace. It's not monolithic. So now you have to do different things in the workplace in order to engage your workforce. So here's a good example. In 1970, if you were someone who was neurodiverse, you probably had a tough time getting a job in 1970. Why? Because you go into an interview and typically we expect people to look you, not neurotypical people, right? Look you in the eye, right? Neurodiverse people may be looking over here while I'm talking to you. And then the person who's interviewing says, that's weird. Can't hire that person because they don't even look me in the eye, and totally miss the boat. Where today in the workplace, if we see that, we now are aware that person might be neurodiverse. That may be why they're not looking at me in the eye. Oh, I need to consider that and not write them off. So that is what workplaces are being encouraged to do today in order to utilize the workforce that's here. And the challenge that I believe we're having in the United States now is there's a shift, right, in terms of the population. And because of that, we need to behave differently. And I do believe because of that, it could have the white male feeling somewhat uncomfortable because this is new. This is different. I mean, forever, right? They have been the leaders within executive ranks. So if you look at a 10K of a Fortune 500 company, typically the person that's leading it is a white male, and the people reporting to that person are typically white men. So I think that some of this may be a little fear-based, unfortunately. And there's some people, when people get afraid or get scared, they want to retract. They want to hold, and some of this too is about power. Yes. People want to hold on to power. Who wants to give up power? No one. Yeah. So that's why I believe, that we're experiencing some of those challenges today.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Now, I want to talk about something specific with respect to the equality part where, I'm having a tough time again, some people might think I come across, you know, saying something that's wrong, but I've actually challenged people on this. Look, I've got a mother, a daughter, and a sister myself, but I feel like in our society today, with all these, you know, I call it like feminist groups creating just, feminine initiatives.
Mhm.
We're really creating, we're creating segregation of the sexes because, in my opinion, I'm all for that. I think I'm all for the equality piece. I've done it when, when I hire people, I don't look at I look at who's right for the role, period. But I also encourage, we want to have more, I have an engineering background. We want to encourage more females to get into engineering, but at the end of the day, it's their choice in terms of what they want to do. I want to help this gender. And I'm sure there's a lot of males out there that want to be part of the, helping them. But I feel like we're just separating. We're just separating people. And as a society, that's what they want us to do is just like separate each other. And I want to get your thoughts on that. I'm very, I'm okay with discussing these kind of topics because I'm not trying to attack anybody out there.
Right.
I'm just speaking my mind, and again, I wanna see how we can integrate better rather than segregating people.
Sure. I think you're onto something, right? Because the more you separate and segregate, then the people who are trying to separate you, they win, right? So I totally agree with you that there needs to be more of a coming together because oftentimes people that come from these other diverse groups have more in common than they profess to have or than they want to admit that they have. Um, so I don't disagree with you as far as that's concerned, quite honestly. I'm not gonna fight you on that, Rob.
Okay. And again, I just wanted to get your opinion because there are a lot of female leaders out there who agree with me. And again, I don't like to call female leaders. I call it, if you're a leader, you're a leader. Why are we separating, male, female, this, that? And to me, that's part of the inclusion piece, anyways. If you want to create that inclusion, you don't look at any of that stuff. And, we'll talk about the unconscious bias. I've got some questions for you there. But I want to start with engagement. Now, for me, I think in leadership and organizations, engagement is vital to a growth of an organization, productivity, safety. It impacts everything, in my opinion. I wanted to get your thoughts on it, and you've worked with leaders at highest levels. What do you believe is the biggest mistake organizations make when it comes to engagement?
I think one of the biggest problems that employees make is not prioritizing it.
Mhm.
And what I mean by that, if it's important to you, you're gonna measure it. So if it's important to you, you're gonna say, okay, I've never measured it. If you're starting out, you would say, I've never measured it before, but let me get a baseline.
Yes.
Where am I today? Why do I want to know that? Because I want to be able to make it better. And for me to be able to make it better, I need to be able to, what's my measuring stick? What's my yardstick? How do I know from whence have I come? Right. So I think that is important. And you can do that in an array of ways. I mean, oftentimes people just use a survey, right? So that's one method that we could use. And usually I would say from my experience in doing that, you can actually get the low-hanging fruit, right? By listening to your employees. But once you've gotten the low hanging fruit, now what? Right. So I think some of the challenging pieces about employee engagement is this piece about feeling that you belong and feeling that you're valued. And oftentimes to understand, do employees feel this way? Yes or no is good to know, but also why? What's the gap? What's missing? And sometimes that's hard to capture in a survey, and that may require more of a focus group. It may require one-on-one communication. If you're serious about increasing your engagement, and all companies should be serious about increasing their engagement because research, I'm at a research institution, right? Research actually says that when employees are engaged, there's a positive correlation to your bottom line. So you would want that.
Amazing. No, I couldn't agree with you more. Now, again, what would your advice be to young leaders who are just starting off in a leadership role? How do they create that engagement within their teams? What's your advice to them?
I love that. I love that. Um, so one thing that I like to do in my first 90 days anywhere, um, is always doing these, I'm gonna call them like one-on-ones, with my team to understand, what really makes them tick. What is it that gets them excited? What is it they want to do with their career, right? Because some people want to keep doing what they're doing today. Some people are like, hey, I want to do this better so that I can fly the coop and get a promotion. Some may want to do something lateral. Some may just want to go into another industry. So you also just have to understand what makes people tick. So I think one thing is finding that out and being interested, sincerely interested in what your employees are interested in. And I think one way to do that, people are often concerned about their career path. So if you can assist them with that, and I think, and as a even as a young leader, you can help position your employees for higher heights if that is what they want.
Yes.
So I think the important thing is understanding what motivates your employees and what is it that gets them excited to work together within the organization that you're in. So I think you have to do, it's homework um to understand that, but I don't think it's hard. I just think people forget that it's people, right? That make the world go round, right? And we just don't we know we focus so quickly on the work at hand that we forget the most integral part of that work is the people and understanding them.
Yes, absolutely. You're speaking my language, and I love it. And that's amazing. That's a great breakdown and advice for young leaders. And I preach the same thing. I've done the same thing. That having those conversations early on with your team is critical. So thank you for sharing that, Giselle.
For sure.
Now, I want to get into the topic of microaggression and the workplace culture. So microaggression um, aggressions are often dismissed as just words or unintentional. Why do they have such a powerful impact in the workplace culture?
So yes, oftentimes they're unintentional. Why do they have such an impact in the workplace? So the challenge with microaggressions is, like you said, oftentimes it's unconscious. So someone may say something,
Mhm.
and they're not intending for it to land in a negative way. So let me give you a good example of an example I share with my students. So we have a number of students from that are international students, aren't from the United States. And one comment that they often hear is, and I'm going to use my African students, is, oh, your English is so good. And they're like, what? English is, a primary language on the continent of Africa. So you should expect me, right, to speak good English. What kind of English do you think I'd be speaking? Of an insult there. How now? Put a pin in that. There could be someone else from another country where English, isn't their first language, right? Or even their second language. And if someone says you speak English really well, they may take that as a compliment.
Yes.
So it depends, right? But what I tell my students is what you're learning about microaggressions is it may insult someone. So if you know that, be alert and be careful and be self-aware of when you say things like that. So, and one of the and it's so interesting you mentioned this because I was on a Zoom last night teaching about microaggressions.
Nice.
And there was a parent on there when you talk about like the harm that it can do. And she would say he's 18 and he's new in the work environment. And this example about the English is something that, they were saying to him about that they were so surprised. And it just really bothered him because he's not even from, I think they're from Cameroon. He was born in the United States. So he's like, I don't understand. I should speak good English, right? And like wherever he went to school was a very good school. So it bothered him to the point where when he would get home, he was down about it because he didn't know how to unpack it with his coworkers to say that he was feeling uncomfortable. And I think that's the other problem with microaggressions. Oftentimes, the person that's offended is difficult to be able to speak out about it because you don't want to insult your colleague, right? And you don't want to upset the apple cart at work, so then it becomes, well, how do I do this? And I always tell my students, and it seems to work, is one thing you can always do is say, what did you mean by that?
Mm.
Because you want to be disarming, right? As opposed to, well, why did you say that? Now that might make someone feel, a little accused of something, right? As opposed to if you ask a question and you ask it curiously, well, you said that, I have good English. I'm just curious. Like, why would you say that? Or what is it that you were expecting? And then you can have a dialogue. Rob, I think it's exactly like you and I are doing tonight, right?
Yes.
We're able to just talk and have a dialogue. We're not trying to one up each other, right? But we're really trying to learn.
Yes.
And I believe that with microaggressions, it's an opportunity for learning because to your point, oftentimes it's done unconscious. And if a person is told, oh, I didn't realize that that would insult you. And usually they'll say, oh, I'm so sorry. That wasn't even my intention. But then for them, that'll trigger next time, ooh, I better be careful, about possibly stereotyping a group, for example.
Amazing. Now, I gotta ask you this, Giselle. Have you personally experienced any microaggressions during your career, and how did you navigate through it?
I have. So one thing that happens to me, and I use this example in my classroom as well, is, because I have an Ivy League degree and I don't wear it on my sleeve. So I very rarely talk about it unless someone asks me. It's just part of who I am. But somehow, some way, Rob, people find out without me telling them. So I'll get a comment. I remember, and it was with someone that I was working with, very nice woman. And she says to me, she says, I have a question for you. So I said, yeah. I said, what's that? She said, I heard you have an MBA from Harvard. I said, mm-hmm. She said, is that true? So I said, yeah. I said, that's true. I said, why? I said, why would you ask? Because does that surprise you? And she said, oh no, I was just curious. And what I said to her, and I felt that we were friendly. So what I said to her, I said, I said, I could actually take offense to that, right? I said, because some people feel that people who look like me, right, don't have a place in the Ivy League school, or they feel that they were given the opportunity because the word you used, or check the box, so to speak. So when you say, how did I get in? I'm like, how does everyone else get in? Right? Like, how did I get into the school? It's like, well, there's an application process. Sometimes there's an interview. Sometimes there's a standardized test. They want to know about your leadership skills. They want to know how you work in a team. So how I got in is based on the same criteria as other people, right? So it could be a slight and maybe not, but that's one that I have experienced.
Amazing. And, again, um, kudos to you. I personally think, you're a very powerful individual. I'm sure you've gone through a lot of challenges within your career and in your journey. And, I did want to ask you, what was the toughest challenge when growing up or in your, in your journey, and what did you learn from it? Because again, it's having that position, a leadership position, um, as a woman, it's hard enough. I understand that, especially in in the past years, DI didn't exist.
Yes.
I've seen personally firsthand people struggle with it, and these were good, talented, females that wanted to get into leadership roles, and there was no opportunities for them. And I experienced the same thing being, a minority trying to get into leadership. And if it's tough for me, and what I felt, I'm just thinking, wow, like how are women dealing with this?
Mhm.
And again, I'm sure you've had your share of challenges. What was the biggest challenge, in your journey, and what did you learn from it that you want to share with people listening?
Sure. So I would say, it's so interesting. You know what's interesting? I will say this. When I have challenges, I don't necessarily ascribe them to a diversity dimension that I have.
Yeah.
I just assume I'm just having this challenge.
Yeah.
So I would say for me, the biggest one that I had was during COVID.
Mm.
My job got eliminated. I was actually working in a company, and it was interesting how I got there. I was hired by the president of the business unit, um, it was a general manager role, but I was reporting to a VP. And he told me, he said, I want to hire you because this person that you were going to report to, his exact words, is a train smash in front of customers. And I was someone who, on the flip side, I had turned failed relationships with customers around. So that's what he was looking for. But I had to also interview, of course, with this VP because that's who I'm going to be reporting to. But it was really the president's idea. So I interview and he gives me tips on how to have this interview. So I pass those with flying colors. I get hired. Rob, my first day is a Monday. That Friday, that president got promoted into a larger business unit. What happened? I had no air cover. That vice president didn't want me there. He didn't ask for me. He didn't think he was a train smash in front of customers. He didn't think he needed me. So when that person left, when I tell you someone really trying to make you fail, gaslighting you, and I'm the type of person, I will not go down without a fight.
Nice.
So if you try to make me crumble, it just makes me be more resilient. So I felt, and not I felt, he was trying to get me to break and to be able to report that I had poor behavior. I wasn't going to let it happen. And then there were other people that jumped on the bandwagon trying to do the same. Then what happened? And then the other thing too, I learned from this, Rob, which I want to share with your audience. Whenever I go to a new company, I always examine the financials of the company, but I never thought about examining the financials of the business unit I'm going into. Because what I learned, Rob, also on top of the fact that this person didn't hire me, this particular business unit has struggled quite a bit financially in general. And not to say I wouldn't have taken the job, but it would have been just good to know. So that's one thing that I'll always do that. Then what happens? COVID happens. So now it's an opportunity to say, wow, well, this is non-essential work. We don't need this role anymore. So guess what? Today's your last day. Right? So that happened. And it's just a matter of how it happened, right? Not just that it happened. And I was just treated poorly, unfairly. And I was working so hard. I was traveling a lot to the point I needed to go visit a cardiologist because I was having accelerated heart rates. Yeah. So it was really making me sick. So I was actually glad that the job got eliminated because it allowed me to step away. I was like, there's no telling what could have happened with that role. So then with that, then I was looking for a new opportunity. And it took me over a year to find that next thing. And when I think about my background, right? So I think about I've been a general manager, but that was my 5th time being a general manager. I have an Ivy League degree. I invested in the tools for my, update my resume, my one pager, my LinkedIn profile. I had a coach to help me also with my interviews. I mean, I feel like I did all of the right things. And I kept ending up being the number 2 candidate to an incumbent. That became my story. And it was so frustrating, for so long. So I would say that was probably the toughest thing. But what was great about that time frame is for the first time, it gave me the opportunity to actually have a clean slate, because every move I had made before then, someone would call for me to go to that next location. And if it made sense and it was something I was aspiring to do, I would say yes to it. But this time I had a chance to say, you know what? Clean slate. And that was good because I had never really done that before. And it really allowed me to actually paint my own canvas for the first time.
Nice.
So what I would say to that is sometimes, in some of your darkest moments, it's interesting because I feel like oftentimes there's a blessing on the other end if you only just look at it that way.
That's right. That's right. Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. I know we got a little sidetracked from
Sorry.
the topics, but I really wanted to get to that, Giselle. And I think, it's stories like that where people can connect with with other people, where they can look in themselves and what they're going through right now and say, holy crap, that's what I'm experiencing. She's gone through it. She's okay. I can be okay too. And I strongly agree with you. I think having faith and having that hope will get you through a lot of things in life. And just, be um always remember that everything's a blessing in disguise sometimes. So,
Yes.
right.
Yes. And sometimes, and then when you're on the other side, you can also see sometimes things happen for a reason.
Yes.
So sometimes doors are shut because you're not supposed to do that particular thing at that moment.
Yes, absolutely. It
Mhm.
wasn't meant for you.
Correct. What's for you is for you, my mother said.
Exactly. Exactly. I want to talk about unconscious bias.
Yes.
And I want to get your take on this is, I don't know if you believe that maybe everyone has a bias, whether they admit to it or not. How do we confront our own unconscious biases before they impact our decisions?
Mhm. So yes, I believe everyone has an unconscious bias. Um, and how do we combat it? So first is an awareness that you have it. I always tell my students, no one should know you better than you know yourself, right? So your boss should not be able to tell you something and you're like, oh, I didn't know that about myself. You should always know. So in terms of unconscious bias, you should know the things that might trigger you. You should know, for example, um, let's use homophily for an example. Basically meaning, we're attracted to people who are like us. So in an interview situation, if I'm interviewing someone that has a Harvard MBA too, and is also from an urban city and is also in the same sorority I'm in. Oh, wow. This is a great candidate. They are amazing. I just can't wait to talk to this person again. Oh, and definitely I'm going to push them to have the second interview. The next person that comes in, they're from a school I have never heard of. The organizations they're a part of, I know nothing about. Their pastimes, their hobbies, nothing I'm interested in. All of a sudden, because I don't have those commonalities, I now feel that candidate is less than. I need to have a trigger to say, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. Is this person qualified for the job?
Yes.
And am I more attracted, more interested in the person that's like me because they're like me? Wow, yeah, I am. So now I know that about myself. So then I catch myself in those moments to try not to do that. So that's how you address it. But I say it's not easy because sometimes people don't want to see themselves.
Yeah.
But true leaders, ask any of them, will tell you, if they've had unconscious bias, what they are and how they combat them. And homophily is one of mine. So I just admit that.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. So, what are some of the most dangerous biases in leadership that often go unnoticed?
I think the one that can often go unnoticed are the halo and the horns effect bias. And what is that? So, halo effect bias is when a performance review is a good example of this. Let's say you're on a calendar year. The first 3 months, this particular employee knocks it out the park in terms of their performance. I mean, you've just never seen anyone do this before. Then for the remaining 9 months, they're average or below average. But you remember that they knocked it out the park for the first 3 months. And because of that, when it comes time for their performance review, you give them an amazing rating. But the truth of the matter, they really only had 3 good months.
Yes.
Right? So I think that can be a dangerous bias. And then the opposite of that is the horns effect, right? So the opposite is for the first 3 months, they did a terrible job. They treated people poorly. They didn't apologize for it. They're not self-aware. But you tell them that. And then for the next 9 months, they really try to turn that around. You get them a coach, they work on it, they're doing better, but you still give them a mediocre review because you remember that the first 3 months were terrible. So that's the horns effect, for a bias. So I think those two can be dangerous in the workplace because the impact to the employee can be problematic.
Amazing. I couldn't agree with you more. Those are great, some great examples you used. So, Giselle, before we end the podcast, we've come to a segment where I call rapid fire questions. I'm going to ask you a series of questions, and again, the first thing that comes to mind, just say it out loud. So, if you're ready to start, let's get going. What's the one book that changed your perspective on leadership or bias?
Mm. I think the title is All of the Black Kids Are Sitting in the Cafeteria Together. I cannot think of the name of the author, but that's the book.
Okay. Amazing. If you could have dinner with any leader from the past or present, who would it be and why?
Bill Clinton.
Wow. Why?
Because he seems so cool as a cucumber. I've never met him, but I know people who have met him, and people who've been on stages with him say that in advance, he learns their names. He walks up to you, calls you by your name, shakes your hand, looks you in the eye. And I don't know why. And he used to have an office in Harlem, and that's where I'm from. And I always had this thought in my mind. I said, one day I'm going to sit next to Bill Clinton and we're going to have a cocktail together.
Nice.
So I still would love to do that.
Awesome. Great. What's your personal mantra or go-to piece of advice when facing challenges?
I'm going to have to come back to that because it's a Bible verse and it's not jumping out right now.
No problem.
Go to the next question.
No problem. What is the one word that describes Giselle best?
Gracious.
Gracious. Amazing. And if you could leave the audience with just one challenge, one action they should take starting today, what would it be?
One challenge that I would put out there is increase your own self-awareness so that no one knows you better than you know yourself. One action that I would couple with that is to find yourself an accountability partner to assist you in helping you become more self-aware. Because sometimes it's difficult for someone that doesn't know you well to be able to honestly critique you.
That's right.
So find yourself someone who would do that honestly.
And you have to learn to, not let your ego get in the way as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Amazing. Again, I want to thank you so much for being with me here today, Giselle. I learned a great deal from you, and I'm sure the audience will take away so many great and the positive aspects of leadership from your stories and insight today. So again, thank you very much for being here. For all those listening and tuning in, if you've got any questions for Giselle, drop it in the comments below and I'll make sure we get it to her. And I'll also share some of her links with the audience as well, including your website. So thank you for tuning in and we'll see you in the next episode. Take care, everybody.
Thanks for having me.